Quick tip here, when you are buying your vinyl tubing, be aware that you need two different sizes. You're going to need a larger size tube, like on the right here, for your main line. A lot of the sellers on Amazon, they only sell you the smaller size, and if you use a vinyl tubing that is not wide enough, you're not going to have enough water pressure going through your system. Our first step here is going to be to measure out the mainline tubing. It's the larger of the two tubes. This allows for water pressure to travel upward and with more volume. So when you're using your main line, go with a larger vinyl tube. Also, you can see here I'm cutting a little bit extra. It's always a good choice to cut a little bit of extra so that you've got more than you need if you have to shorten it. The other thing is when you're connecting the main line to the elbows or any of the other plastic connectors, it's going to be a little difficult at first. The vinyl can be tight, blowing onto the ends, getting it a little warmer. This can make life a little easier. You're going to have to push the vinyl tube all the way up over the barb so that it doesn't fly off when your pump turns on. Also, make sure that the vinyl tube is covering the entirety of that first plastic piece and at least the first barb. It can take some work to push it on there, so keep going. One other quick tip is going to be to make sure that you've got the elbows pointing in the correct direction as you continue to add pieces to the tubing. Here, we're going to connect the larger tube, the main line, to our smaller tubes that we then connect to the spray nozzles and the atomizers. This allows for larger volumes of water again to travel upward and fight gravity. The big tubing, though, it's not going to fit onto the atomizing adapters. So you got to use these little connectors and make sure that it fits nice and snug. Again, we don't want these exploding when the water pressure turns on. Another important tip here is going to be to complete all of the tubing before you start zip tying. That means measuring out the lengths that you're going to need, connecting them all, and then making sure that it fits into your greenhouse before you start adhering everything to the structure itself. If things are too short or too long as you go and you've zip tied things, it can get really annoying. So make sure that everything fits before you start securing it to the actual greenhouse itself. For the lower part of the greenhouse, I'm going to make a bunch of connecting tubes so that I can have individual atomizers for each plant in the greenhouse. This is sort of a preference on my part so that each of these small plants gets enough water to grow. The other thing is that this is going to save you some water, and if it's not overhead and spraying everywhere, you're not going to have a ton of leakage. Since this is in my basement, I don't want water just spilling everywhere. Here you can see the difference between the spray nozzle atomizers and the drippers for the top part of the greenhouse, since there's not as many trees and they are a bit bigger than the saplings down on the bottom. I'm going to use these so that the plants get a sufficient amount of water. I'm using a sort of drip system here, so I just need more water to come out of the top than the bottom. Since the pump that I'm using, it uses a different size to interface with the vinyl tubing than the tubing I got from Amazon, I'm using an adapter here to reduce the size of the tubes itself. You can see I'm using a brass barbed adapter here and making sure that it fits nice and snug into the adapting tube that I created as well. Make sure that all of your fittings, they fit nice and tight, that there's not any leakage out the sides. Again, you don't want these things flying apart once the pump does turn on. So now that I've got the pump attached to my main irrigation system and everything's nice and zip tied, I'm going to plug in the timer. This is a digital timer. It allows me to set the time that it's on to a minute. I used a digital timer here because I don't want the greenhouse to be on for like, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes, for example. That way water isn't all over my basement. To set up this digital adapter, I'm going to set the time for the clock itself, then I'm going to set the times that it turns on and off. Again, I set that to a 1 minute interval. That way I don't run out of water or all the water is all over my floor. I'm also using an old cat litter box as my reservoir. You can use whatever you would like to. I designed this system so that I could just remember to fill up the reservoir and make sure that there's water in there and my plants will stay alive during the winter. I tend to sometimes forget about watering them. So here you can see that the automatic water turns on. I'm getting sufficient pressure to the upper and lower systems. This way I can, again, just fill up the reservoir and not have to worry about whether or not my plants are getting watered. I've set up this system to sort of be on a drip irrigation type system, again, so that it's not spraying overhead and getting water everywhere, and also it's going to conserve as much water as possible so that, again, I can keep this as automated as humanly possible. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any suggestions or comments, please leave them below.